In Millstone County, the land does not forget. It rolls in long, patient waves of amber and dust, stitched together by barbed wire fences and old cedar posts bleached white by 40 summers. The fields stretch so wide that the horizon bends gently, like a tired back bowing toward evening. Wind moves through the tall grass in slow breaths, flattening it in silver ripples before lifting it again, as though the earth itself is whispering secrets to the sky. There is a gravel road that cuts through it all, pale, chalky, and stubborn. In spring it turns to ruts and mud. In summer it shimmers under heat so fierce it makes the air look liquid. That road leads to a farmhouse that sits alone beneath a sky too big for comfort. The farmhouse is painted a yellow that has faded into something softer, the colour of old paper left in sunlight. Its porch sags slightly in the middle. The screen door hangs crooked, and when it closes, it doesn't click. It sighs. Beside the house stands a red barn with peeling paint that curls like sunburned skin. One shutter is missing. The other bangs in the wind when storms roll in from the west. The roof hums in heavy rain. Swallows nest high in the rafters, stitching their mud homes into the beams the way generations stitched their lives into this soil. To the east, beyond the barn, acres of wheat bow low in unison. To the west, a line of cottonwoods guards a narrow creek that only runs strong in early spring. In August it shrinks to a trickle and reveals smooth stones beneath. Stones that have felt the footsteps of 3 generations of Harper men. And at the centre of it all, hands folded in her apron, silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, stands Evelyn Harper. She is 73 years old, but the land still knows her weight. Her boots press into the dirt with memory. She walks the fence line each morning, the way some people say their prayers. She touches the wooden posts, runs her palm over the splintered grain, and feels for weakness. Still holding, she murmurs to the fence, as though it might answer her. Because fences, like promises, must be checked. This land was bought in 1946 by her husband's father with money saved from factory shifts and wartime ration books. It was cleared by hand. Trees were felled with sweat and rope and stubbornness. Every acre carries a story of blisters and frostbite and hope stitched into survival. Evelyn remembers the first time she came here as a bride, 18 years old, city shoes sinking into mud, staring out at a field that seemed too large to belong to anyone. "It's yours now, too," her husband Samuel had said, his smile wide, his hands still smelling of diesel and hay. "It'll take care of us if we take care of it." She had believed him, and for decades the land had kept its word. Corn rose high as shoulders, wheat came in golden and thick, rain fell when it needed to. The farmhouse filled with children's laughter, then grandchildren's. Sunday dinners stretched long across the oak table. Windows glowed warm in winter. But land, like people, feels pressure. And pressure had arrived in the form of men in pressed shirts and polished boots who did not smell like soil. They came first in black trucks that left no dust because they drove too slowly. They stood at the edge of the property with folded arms and thin smiles, their eyes measuring distance the way a butcher measures meat. "Prime acquisition corridor," one of them had said once, not realizing Evelyn stood inside the barn listening. Another voice had replied, "They'll fold, they always do." The land heard that too. Now, late afternoon light spills sideways across the fields, turning every blade of wheat into a thin blade of fire. The sky blushes into soft lavender near the horizon. Crickets begin their evening chorus. A hawk circles high above, patient and precise. Evelyn stands near the western fence, looking out over the acres her family has worked for 70 years. A for sale sign has appeared 3 properties down. Another neighbour has taken the offer. Another barn will fall. She can feel the change in the soil, heavy machinery testing nearby fields, survey stakes marking boundaries that were once settled by handshake. She kneels and presses her palm flat against the dirt. The earth is warm from the day's heat. "They think you're empty space," she says quietly. They don't know you remember. The wind lifts her apron slightly and settles again. In the distance, the gravel road hums. A truck approaches, not one of hers, not a neighbour's either. It moves with confidence, like it already owns what it hasn't paid for. Evelyn rises slowly, brushing dust from her knees. The sun sits low behind her now, throwing her shadow long across the yard, tall and unyielding, stretching nearly to the barn doors. The truck stops at the gate, the engine cuts, and for a moment, the land goes still. No birds, no wind, just the faint ticking of cooling metal. The driver's door opens, a polished shoe touches Harper soil, and the land, which has seen drought and flood and war and death, braces itself once more. Because some battles are not fought with guns. Some are fought with deeds and signatures and quiet women who refuse to move. And in Millstone County, the land does not forget. Neither does Evelyn Harper. Evelyn was 73 when the letter came. The envelope was white, official, impersonal. It carried the bank's logo in blue ink and language that pretended to be sympathetic. Final notice of default. Her farm, 112 acres of rolling pasture, a red barn with peeling paint, and a farmhouse older than the paved road leading to it, was scheduled for auction in 30 days. 30 days to erase 4 generations. People in town shook their heads. Times are hard, they said gently. Banks don't make exceptions. She should have sold when she had the chance. But Evelyn Harper did not cry. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside something far older. 40 years earlier, the land looked younger. The paint on the farmhouse was still bright. The barn roof didn't sag. The fence posts stood straighter. And the wheat, that year, grew tall enough to brush against a man's ribs when he walked through it. Samuel Harper stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, hands raw from twine and work. The late afternoon light slanted through lace curtains Evelyn had sewn herself, dust drifting in its beam like tiny floating seeds. Evelyn Harper was 26 then. Her hair was darker, pinned loosely at the back of her neck. There was flour on her cheek. She had been kneading dough when Samuel came in, boots heavy, silence heavier. He did not sit. He stood by the table, hat in his hands, turning it slowly. "They came by again," he said. Evelyn didn't look up at first. "Who?" she asked softly, though she already knew. "Men from the county office, and one from the bank, Richard Caldwell." Now she did look up. Outside, through the open window, cicadas hummed thick and loud in the heat. Somewhere near the creek, a dog barked once and then stopped. "What did they want?" she asked. Samuel let out a breath that sounded like wind through dry stalks. "They're talking about running a highway spur through the north end of the property. Said it'd be good for development, good for growth." He swallowed. "Good for property value." Evelyn wiped her hands slowly on her apron. "They want to buy it." Samuel nodded. "They said we could pay off the remaining loan on the south field. Said we could modernize, maybe even move closer to town." The word move lingered in the kitchen like smoke. Evelyn stepped toward the window and looked out across the fields. The wheat shifted in a golden wave. Beyond it, the cottonwoods stood quiet and unmoving. "And what did you tell them?" she asked. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I told them this land isn't for sale." Evelyn's shoulders lowered. Not in relief exactly, but in recognition. She walked toward him, close enough to see the crease between his brows, the worry there he tried to hide. "They'll be back," she said. "I know. They'll raise the offer. I know. They'll say we're holding the county back." Samuel gave a small, humorless smile. "They already did." Silence settled between them, not tense, just heavy with the future. After a moment, Samuel pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and laid it on the table. It was an offer, numbers written in clean, sharp ink. more money than they had ever seen in one place. Evelyn stared at it. "That's enough to clear every debt," she whispered. Samuel nodded. "And then some." The clock above the stove ticked steadily. Evelyn reached out and flattened the paper with her palm, as if testing its reality. The ink was still fresh. "You ever think about it?" she asked quietly. "About what it would be like to not worry every time the rain comes late, or when the tractor breaks down?" Samuel looked at her then, really looked. "I think about it," he admitted. "Every time I see you sewing the same dress twice over. Every time I patch the roof instead of replacing it." He stepped closer. "But I also think about my father clearing that north field by hand. I think about my mother cooking on a wood stove in winter because they couldn't afford coal. I think about how they stood right where we are and decided this land would outlast them." Evelyn's eyes softened. "And you think selling would break that?" Samuel's voice dropped. "I think selling would make it easier for the next man to take what he wants." Outside, wind bent the wheat slightly, as if listening. Evelyn walked past him and opened the back door. Warm air rushed in, smelling of soil and sun and distance. She stepped onto the porch. Samuel followed. They stood side by side, looking over the land. "Do you remember the first night we slept here?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You cried." She nudged him lightly. "I didn't cry, I just wondered what we had done. You said it was too quiet. It was. And now?" Evelyn watched the fields carefully. "Now I can hear everything," she said. The barn door creaked in the breeze. The creek moved faintly beyond the trees. Birds lifted suddenly from the far field, startled by nothing visible. "This land holds our life," she continued. "Our children will learn to walk on this soil. They'll bury dogs under that oak tree. They'll carve their initials in the fence posts." She paused. "If we sell, we don't just move, we erase." Samuel reached for her hand. "They say progress is coming," he murmured. Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "Progress doesn't have to mean surrender." He looked at her then, something steady returning to his posture. "What if they make it hard?" he asked. "They will," she said plainly. "What if they raise taxes?" "They might." "What if they try to box us in?" Evelyn turned fully toward him now. "Then we stand where we are." The sun dipped lower, painting the fields in copper light. Samuel nodded slowly. "I told them the Harper land doesn't break." Evelyn smiled, small, fierce. "Then don't let it." Inside, the clock kept ticking. The paper with the offer still lay on the table. When they went back inside, Samuel picked it up. For a long moment he stared at the numbers again. Then carefully, deliberately, he tore it in half. The sound was sharp and final. Evelyn watched without speaking. Samuel dropped the pieces into the wood stove and struck a match. The paper curled quickly, ink blackening, edges glowing. "They'll be back," he said again. Evelyn stepped beside him, her voice steady. "Let them come." And outside, the land, younger then, but already patient, held their promise in its roots. Richard Caldwell did not like hearing no. He was not from Bryan County, but he learned quickly how to move through it. He donated to campaigns, he invested in local businesses, he joined the country club 20 miles away, and began introducing himself as someone who believed in modernizing rural assets. When Evelyn's husband Samuel died 5 years later, Richard returned. This time, he sent offers through lawyers, then warnings, then pressure. The farm's property taxes were reassessed, sharply upward. The bank, which had never questioned her modest operating loan before, suddenly tightened terms. Feed suppliers stopped extending credit. Evelyn paid what she could. But land rich did not mean cash rich, and banks prefer paper over memory. The town hall in Millstone County had not changed in 60 years. The ceiling fans still turned with a soft wobble. The folding chairs still scraped against the same scuffed wooden floors. The American flag in the corner leaned slightly left, as if tired from standing too long. But the man at the podium was new. Richard Caldwell stood tall beneath fluorescent lights that flattened everything into harsh clarity. His suit was charcoal, tailored perfectly. His smile was measured. He held a remote in one hand and a confidence in the other. Behind him, a projection screen glowed blue. "Good evening," he began, his voice warm, practiced. "I'm here to talk about opportunity." The word hung in the air like perfume. Evelyn Harper sat in the third row. Her hands rested on her cane. She did not blink. Caldwell clicked the remote. A digital rendering appeared. Bright, clean, unreal. Where wheat fields once bent in wind, there now stood glass-fronted retail buildings. A 4-lane highway cut confidently through what had been family farmland. Streetlights lined fresh asphalt like obedient soldiers. "This," Caldwell said smoothly, "is the proposed Millstone Revitalization Corridor." He gestured toward the image. Phase 1 includes a commercial development plaza, featuring a regional grocery anchor, 2 national chain restaurants, a fuel station and mixed-use retail space. We're projecting over 200 permanent jobs in the first 18 months. A murmur rippled through the room. He clicked again. The image shifted. Now there were rows of beige townhouses, identical, symmetrical, trimmed with decorative shutters. Phase 2 will bring modern housing to the area, 300 residential units designed for young professionals and growing families, affordable, efficient, future-focused. He paused just long enough to let that sink in. Our studies indicate Millstone County is positioned perfectly for growth. With improved highway access, we expect property values to rise significantly within 5 years. He let the numbers follow. Estimated increase of 28 to 35%. Someone in the back whistled softly. Caldwell smiled as if surprised by the enthusiasm. "Additionally," he continued, clicking once more, "we are planning a state-of-the-art logistics distribution center on the north end of the corridor." The image changed again. A massive warehouse now stood where cottonwoods once guarded the creek. Loading docks, delivery bays, semi-trucks, lined like dominoes. "This facility alone," Caldwell said, "will create immediate construction jobs and long-term employment opportunities. We anticipate significant tax revenue growth, revenue that can be reinvested into schools, infrastructure, and public services." He stepped slightly to the side. "And let me be clear, we are not here to take from Millstone. We are here to build with it." He changed slides again. This time, the image zoomed in. A red outline traced the proposed corridor. It ran straight through the North Fields, through the Harper land, through soil that had been worked for 70 years. "We've identified underutilized acreage," Caldwell said gently, carefully. "Large parcels currently generating minimal economic output compared to their potential." Underutilized. The word was precise, polished, sharp. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Caldwell continued, "We understand these lands hold history. We respect that. That's why we are offering generous acquisition packages, above-market rates, relocation assistance, legacy recognition." He smiled again, this time softer. "We're even prepared to name certain sections of the development after founding families. Harper Way, Bennett Square, memorial green spaces honoring agricultural heritage." He spread his hands as if offering a gift. "You don't lose your story," he said. "You evolve it." A man near the front raised his hand. "What happens if someone doesn't want to sell?" Caldwell's smile did not falter. "We are confident," he replied, "that once the full benefits are understood, participation will be voluntary." A pause. "And in rare cases where alignment is difficult, the county retains legal tools to ensure essential infrastructure moves forward." The phrase was smooth, but everyone heard the word he did not say: eminent domain. The fans above continued their slow rotation. Caldwell advanced to a final slide, a sunset rendering of the future corridor glowing gold and pristine, families strolling sidewalks that had never known mud. Millstone, he concluded, deserves to step into the future. Applause came first from the town council table, then scattered throughout the room. Evelyn did not clap. She looked instead at the red line on the screen. It cut through her north field like a wound already opened. Underutilized acreage, minimal economic output, the land that had fed 3 generations, the creek where her children learned to fish, the oak tree where Samuel carved their initials, underutilized. Caldwell stepped down from the podium and began shaking hands. When he reached Evelyn's row, he paused. "Mrs. Harper," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Evelyn did not take it. "I'm sure you have," she replied. He lowered his hand slowly. "We'd love to sit down and discuss options," he continued. "Your property is central to the corridor's success." "Central," she repeated quietly. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him, the crisp cufflinks, the careful hair, the confidence of a man who had never watched crops fail under a dry sky. "And if I'm not interested?" she asked. His smile thinned, just slightly. "Change can feel uncomfortable at first," he said gently, "but growth is inevitable." Evelyn leaned forward, just enough for only him to hear. "So is resistance." For the first time that evening, something flickered behind Caldwell's eyes. Not anger, calculation. He straightened his jacket. "We'll be in touch," he said. As he walked away, the projection screen still glowed with its digital future. Sidewalks where wheat once bent, trucks where crickets once sang. Outside, beyond the town hall windows, the real fields lay under a darkening sky. Quiet, patient, waiting. Because plans drawn in light are easy, but land written in blood and memory does not surrender to slides and applause. And Richard Caldwell had just drawn a red line through soil that remembered every promise ever made upon it. There was one thing Richard Caldwell had overlooked, one thing he had never asked about, because it did not appear on public listings. It was older than the deed, older than the farmhouse, older even than the Harper name on the mailbox. Water. The first time they tried to corner her, it wasn't about land, it was about water. The letter arrived in a clean white envelope with a return address from Caldwell Development Group. The language inside was polite, clinical, almost apologetic. Notice of proposed water access realignment pursuant to regional infrastructure modernization. They wanted access to the creek, not ownership, not yet, just access. A temporary easement, they called it, necessary for utility expansion, drainage optimization, future stormwater management to support commercial build-out. Necessary. Evelyn read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Outside, wind combed through the cottonwoods along the creek bank, their leaves flashing silver green in the sun. The creek had never been decorative, it had never been optional. It ran narrow most summers, but it never stopped entirely. It cut along the western edge of the Harper land before bending south, feeding 3 neighbouring properties before eventually widening miles away. Riparian rights. The term sounded fragile, legal, technical. But Evelyn remembered it differently. She remembered mud between her toes and her father's voice steady beside her. She had been 9 the first time he walked her down to the water at dawn. Mist hovered low over the surface. Frogs fell silent when they approached. The air smelled green and alive. Her father crouched and dipped his hand into the current. "Feel that," he said. She had copied him. Cold, alive, moving even when it looked still. "Water don't belong to us," her father told her. "It passes through. We borrow it. That's all." She looked up at him, confused. "But it's on our land." He smiled slightly. "It's with our land, not owned. That creek was here before fences, before deeds, before names." He picked up a smooth stone and dropped it gently back into the current. Riparian rights mean we get to use what touches our property, for livestock, for irrigation, for survival. But we don't get to choke it, don't get to poison it, don't get to stop it from flowing downstream. He stood and looked south, toward the neighbours' fields. Whatever we do upstream reaches somebody else. That had stayed with her. Whatever we do upstream reaches somebody else. Years later, during a dry spell when the water thinned to barely a ribbon, she remembered asking him if they should dam it, just temporarily, to hold more for themselves. He shook his head. If we hoard it, the Bennets lose their cattle. If we divert it, the Thompsons' well runs shallow. Water's a shared promise. Then he had placed his hand on her shoulder. And promises tied to water last longer than contracts. Back in the present, Evelyn folded the letter slowly. Caldwell's proposal wasn't about irrigation. It was about control. Attached to the notice was a diagram, a proposed redirection culvert, a widening of the creek bed to accommodate storm surge retention. And further down, in smaller print, permission to install intake pipes for future municipal supply assessment. Intake pipes. They wouldn't just touch the water, they would measure it, regulate it, potentially limit it. If the creek were rerouted even slightly, flow rates downstream would change, soil saturation patterns would shift, erosion could follow, wells could weaken, and if construction runoff contaminated it, the damage would not stop at her fence line. Whatever we do upstream reaches somebody else. Evelyn walked down to the creek that evening with the letter folded in her apron pocket. The cottonwoods swayed overhead. Sunlight broke in fragments across the water's surface. A dragonfly skimmed low, wings catching gold. She crouched carefully and pressed her hand into the current the way her father once had. Cold, alive, moving even when it looked still. "They think you're a line on a map," she murmured. The water slipped around her fingers without argument. Her father's voice returned again, not loud, not dramatic, just steady as ever. "Land can forgive mistakes," he had said once, while repairing a broken fence. "You can replant, you can reseed, you can mend soil." But when she asked about the time a neighbouring farmer had dumped chemical runoff into a tributary years ago, killing fish for miles, his tone had changed. "Water remembers," he had said. She hadn't understood then. She did now. If Caldwell gained easement access under the language of infrastructure, it wouldn't stop with culverts. Control of water meant leverage. Leverage meant pressure. And pressure could force landowners to sell faster than any offer letter. She stood slowly, knees stiff, but resolve steady. The creek curved south, disappearing past the bend, toward 3 other families who trusted that the Harper stretch would remain clean, open, flowing. Water was not property, it was responsibility. That night, she pulled the old deed box from beneath her bed. Inside were brittle documents tied with twine, surveys, handwritten amendments, water use agreements signed decades ago between neighbouring farms. One document bore her father's signature, a mutual water assurance pact dated 1968. In careful penmanship it read, "The natural flow of Millstone Creek shall remain unobstructed and uncontaminated by the undersigned, in recognition of shared agricultural dependency and generational stewardship." Generational stewardship. Not acquisition, not development, stewardship. Evelyn traced her father's signature with her thumb. "They'll say it's modernization," she whispered into the quiet room, but she could already see what it was. Control the water, weaken the land, force the sale. Her father had once told her something else, something softer, spoken while they sat on the bank watching late summer light fade. "People fight loud over land," he had said. "They fight quiet over water." She hadn't asked what he meant. Now she understood. The next morning, when Caldwell's representative returned with a surveyor and 2 county officials, they found Evelyn waiting at the fence line near the creek. The papers in their hands were crisp. Her voice was not raised. "This water passes through," she told them calmly. It does not belong to you to reroute. The surveyor cleared his throat. Ma'am, this is standard infrastructure planning. She looked directly at him. Standard doesn't make it right. The county official shifted uncomfortably. We're only assessing flow. She tilted her head slightly. And once you assess it? No one answered immediately. Wind moved through the cottonwoods. The creek kept flowing, alive, moving even when it looked still. Evelyn rested both hands on the top rail of the fence. My father taught me that whatever we do upstream reaches somebody else, she said evenly. If you change this creek, you don't just answer to me. The silence that followed was not legal, it was moral. And for the first time, Caldwell's plan met something it had not anticipated. A woman who understood that water is not leverage, it is legacy. When the foreclosure notice came, Evelyn did not call the bank. She gathered the documents wrapped in oilcloth and put them in a folder. Evelyn smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just certain. The auction was held in the livestock pavilion at the edge of town. It was the same structure where calves had once been weighed and ribboned, where 4-H banners used to hang from rafters smelling of hay and sweat. Now folding chairs lined the concrete floor in uneven rows. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A long table sat at the front with legal folders stacked neatly in cautious piles. Outside, dust lifted from the parking lot in restless spirals. Inside, the air felt rehearsed. The notice had read, Public Auction, Asset Liquidation, Harper Northfield Parcel. The wording had been careful. It did not say forced, it did not say pressured, it did not say engineered. Evelyn entered slowly, cane tapping against concrete. Conversations softened as she passed. Not out of kindness, but out of discomfort. Some eyes carried sympathy, others carried calculation. At the front stood Richard Caldwell, hands clasped behind his back, speaking in low tones to the auctioneer. A tall man with a polished voice and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Clean process, Caldwell was saying. Transparency matters. The auctioneer nodded. Of course. Market value determined by competitive interest. The auctioneer's voice grew excited. Public auction. Asset liquidation. Harper Northfield Parcel. Evelyn took a seat in the second row. Caldwell noticed. He crossed the floor with easy confidence. Mrs. Harper, he greeted smoothly. I'm glad you came. She looked up at him without rising. It's my land, she replied. Seemed appropriate. His smile tightened slightly. This is simply how the system works. We can't let parcels stagnate under financial strain. Strain you created, she said evenly. A flicker passed through his eyes. The reassessment was performed by the county, he answered, after your proposal was submitted. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. If you'd accepted our original offer, you'd be walking away comfortably right now. She adjusted her grip on her cane. I don't walk away from soil that buried my husband. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Caldwell straightened. Well, he said lightly, let's see what the market decides. He stepped back, just as the auctioneer moved to the microphone. The hum of feedback crackled once. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announced, voice amplified and artificially bright. We are here today to conduct a lawful public auction of Parcel 14B, approximately 72 acres of agriculturally zoned land located north of Millstone Creek. 72 acres. He might as well have said 72 years of memory. He continued. Opening bid is set at $200,000. A murmur rippled. 200,000 was low, intentionally low. An invitation. Silence stretched. Then a hand lifted near the back, a man Evelyn recognized. His farm had been struggling since last year's drought. 200, the man said quietly. The auctioneer nodded sharply. 200,000. Do I hear 250? Another hand rose. 250. The numbers began to climb. 275, 300, 325. But something felt off. The bidders weren't looking at one another. They were glancing, subtly, toward Caldwell, as if waiting. At 350,000, the local farmer hesitated. He swallowed, calculating risk. Caldwell raised his hand casually. 400. The room shifted. That was not competitive. That was dominant. The auctioneer smiled wider. $400,000. Do I hear 425? The local farmer lowered his hand. He could not match that. Another bidder, a developer from 2 counties over, considered for a moment. 425. Caldwell did not pause. 500. The number landed heavy. The air changed. This was no longer about price discovery. It was about demonstration. The auctioneer's voice grew excited. $500,000. $500,000 for parcel 14B. Do I hear 525? No one spoke. Caldwell stood still, hands folded. The silence deepened. The auctioneer scanned the room. 500,000 going once. Evelyn's voice cut through the air, calm, steady. What's the appraisal value listed on county record? The auctioneer blinked. Ma'am, this is an auction. What's the appraisal value? She repeated. A county clerk near the side table shuffled papers. 310,000, she answered reluctantly. A murmur followed. Evelyn looked at Caldwell. You're bidding nearly 200,000 over assessed value, she said quietly. That's not market correction. Caldwell met her gaze. It's vision, he replied. She held his stare. It's acquisition. The auctioneer cleared his throat. 500,000 going once. A voice from the side called out, 525. Heads turned. It was unexpected. Not a developer, not a corporation, but one of the downstream landowners, the Bennett boy, now grown. Caldwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Bennett family relied on the Harper stretch of creek for stable flow. If Caldwell owned the North Field, water control became leverage. Caldwell raised his paddle again. 600. Gasps broke loose. That number was no longer strategic. It was personal. The Bennett boy faltered. He shook his head slowly and lowered his bid card. The auctioneer's voice rang bright and triumphant. $600,000 going once, going twice. Evelyn watched Caldwell carefully. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was measuring her, waiting for collapse, waiting for visible defeat. Sold. The gavel struck. The sound echoed against metal beams and empty rafters. Just like that, the North Field changed hands, but Caldwell did not look victorious, because Evelyn did not look broken. She rose slowly, steady despite the weight of the moment. As people began to shuffle toward the exit, Caldwell approached her once more. It didn't have to be this way, he said. She looked past him toward the open pavilion doors, where dust swirled in late light. You paid 600,000 for land you still can't control, she answered. He frowned slightly. I own it now. She met his eyes fully. You own dirt, not water access, not community agreements, not legacy easements. Something flickered behind his calm exterior. You're running out of leverage, he warned quietly. Evelyn's voice did not rise. My father used to say people fight loud over land and quiet over water. She stepped closer. You just fought loud. Then she walked past him, cane tapping against concrete. Behind her, men folded chairs. Papers were stacked. Engines started in the parking lot. But outside, beyond the sold parcel, beyond the red stakes marking its boundary, Millstone Creek kept flowing. Alive. Moving even when it looked still. And Richard Caldwell had just spent $600,000 to step into a battle he still did not understand. The next weeks were not dramatic. They were devastating. Engineers confirmed the spring's route. Environmental reports concluded the planned lake could not be sustained without access to Evelyn's water rights. Alternative water sourcing would triple costs. Investors grew uneasy. Town council members who had celebrated the revitalization project began returning calls more slowly. Richard visited Evelyn's farmhouse one last time. He stood on her porch, though it was no longer legally hers, and removed his sunglasses. "What do you want?" he asked. Evelyn poured tea, same chipped mugs, same kitchen table. "I want the foreclosure rescinded," she said, "with penalties removed." Richard stared. "That's not how this works." "It is today." He leaned forward. "You're asking me to unwind a public purchase?" "Yes." "You'll ruin the project." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "You tried to ruin my home." He exhaled sharply. "This is personal." She nodded once. It always was. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning. Caldwell insisted on hosting it at his temporary project office, a glass-walled modular building erected on the edge of town, just close enough to the Harper property to feel intentional. Through its wide windows, you could see survey flags staked like small red warnings across open land. Inside, everything smelled new carpet, new paint, new ambition. Richard Caldwell stood when Evelyn entered. He wore a navy suit this time, no tie, an attempt at approachability. "Mrs. Harper," he greeted, extending his hand again. She removed her gloves slowly before taking it. His grip was firm. Hers did not yield. "Mr. Caldwell." He gestured toward a polished table already laid with documents, maps, and bottled water placed with careful symmetry. "I appreciate you agreeing to talk." "I didn't agree," she replied calmly. "I said I would listen." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's a start." They sat opposite each other. Between them lay a large aerial map of Millstone County. Red markings cut through familiar ground, like veins drawn by someone who had never walked it. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "Let me be direct," he began. "This project is moving forward. The North Field has already been secured. Highway approval is pending but favourable. Investors are aligned." He slid a folder toward her. "We would like to acquire the remaining Harper parcels in a cooperative arrangement." She did not touch the folder. "And if I decline?" He clasped his hands loosely. "I would prefer not to escalate through legal mechanisms." Evelyn tilted her head. "You mean eminent domain?" He did not flinch. "Infrastructure authority exists for a reason." "For roads," she replied. "For schools. Not for retail plazas." His tone stayed smooth. "The logistics center qualifies under economic development statutes." "And the restaurants?" she asked quietly. "Are those essential infrastructure too?" A pause. He adjusted the map slightly, as if recentering control. "You've lived here a long time, Mrs. Harper. You've seen farms fail, young people leave, Main Street hollow out." "That isn't because of wheat," she said. "It's because there are no opportunities." "There are opportunities," she answered. "They just don't look like what you're selling." Caldwell exhaled slowly. "Let's talk numbers." He opened the folder and turned it toward her. The offer was significantly higher than before. $875,000 for the remaining acreage, relocation stipend, lifetime property tax forgiveness if she moved within county limits. And, printed in bold near the bottom, Harper Memorial Greenway, to honor agricultural heritage. "They'll name a sidewalk after us," she said softly. "It's recognition," he replied. "It's decoration." He leaned back slightly. "You could retire comfortably, travel, live closer to medical facilities. You've earned rest." She looked at him for a long moment. "Rest isn't the same as surrender." His voice sharpened just a degree. "It's not surrender to adapt. It is when someone else decides the timing." The silence thickened. Outside the glass wall, a surveyor hammered another stake into the ground. The sound echoed faintly. Caldwell's patience thinned. "You're holding on to sentiment at the expense of progress." Evelyn's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the map. You see sentiment. I see contracts older than your corporation. He frowned. What contracts? She slid a folded document from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. The 1968 Mutual Water Assurance Pact, signed by 4 families, filed with the county, recorded. Any development that alters Millstone Creek's natural flow requires unanimous consent from all signatories or their heirs, she said evenly. His eyes moved quickly over the paper. That agreement predates current zoning structures. It was recorded, she replied, which means it's binding. He didn't answer immediately. She continued. You own the North Field now. Congratulations, but you don't control the creek. And without creek adjustment, your drainage model collapses. He leaned forward, studying her more carefully now. You've done your homework. I was raised by a man who read every line before signing his name. Caldwell's jaw tightened. There are ways to dissolve outdated covenants. There are, she agreed, but not without scrutiny. Their eyes locked. You're prepared to fight this? He asked quietly. I've already been fighting. His tone lowered. Legal fees alone could drain you. She allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. You assume I'm alone. He paused. For the first time, doubt flickered. You've rallied the downstream families, he realized. I reminded them what upstream decisions do. His voice hardened. This development is bigger than your memory of wheat. And your development is smaller than your imagination of power. The words landed clean. He stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the land he believed inevitable. You can't stop growth, he said. No, she replied, but I can shape it. He turned back. What does that mean? It was her move now. She reached into her bag and placed a second folder on the table. Inside were Conservation Trust documents, preliminary filings, a petition for agricultural preservation status under state heritage land designation. If this land is registered as protected agricultural watershed, she said calmly, state review supersedes county acquisition authority. His expression changed. You'd freeze development for decades. I'd protect water for generations. He stepped closer to the table. You'd reduce your own land's resale value. I'm not selling. The room felt smaller now, the polished surfaces less certain. Caldwell lowered his voice. You're turning this into a war. She met his gaze without blinking. You turned it into one when you drew a red line through my field. A long silence followed, measured, waited. Finally, he spoke again, quieter than before. What do you want? There it was. Not victory, not dominance, recognition of stalemate. Evelyn folded her gloves carefully in her lap. I want the creek untouched, she said. I want the Northfield's drainage re-engineered without diversion. I want a written guarantee that no eminent domain petition will be filed against the remaining Harper parcels. He stared at her. That's unrealistic. It's non-negotiable. He exhaled sharply. You're asking me to reduce profitability. You're asking me to erase inheritance. Another silence. Then he asked the question he should have asked at the beginning. Why does it matter this much? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked past him through the glass, beyond the stakes and flags, toward the faint silver line of the creek in the distance. My father told me water passes through, she said softly. We borrow it. That's all. Her eyes returned to him. You're trying to own something that isn't yours to keep. For a moment, Richard Caldwell looked less like a developer and more like a man standing at the edge of something deeper than he had planned for. You're very stubborn, he said finally. No, she replied gently. I'm rooted. And in that bright, temporary office built on unsettled soil, the negotiation ended not with agreement, but with the first understanding that this was no longer about purchase price. It was about permanence. Richard Caldwell held a press conference 2 weeks later. He announced a strategic pause on the North Valley project. He spoke of community dialogue, of respecting local history. Evelyn watched from her living room. She did not smile, she did not gloat. She simply reached for the oilcloth-wrapped documents and returned them to the attic. The land was quiet again, not empty, not surrendered, just quiet in the way fields become quiet after a storm has passed and the sky has decided to be blue again. The red survey flags were gone. The legal filings had settled. The conservation status had been approved. Millstone Creek still curved along the western edge of the Harper property, untouched, unchanneled, unmeasured. Evelyn stood at the fence line at dusk, her hands resting over the weathered top rail. The wheat bowed softly in the evening wind. The air smelled like soil cooling after a long day. She could hear crickets beginning their steady rhythm, and somewhere near the barn, a loose hinge creaked in familiar complaint. It felt the way it used to, but quieter in her chest, because there was someone who should have been standing beside her, and wasn't. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the wind press against her cheek. And just like that, she was 45 years younger. It had been late summer. Samuel had been shirtless in the field, sweat tracing the line of his spine as he repaired a broken irrigation pipe. The sun had painted his shoulders bronze, dirt streaked across his hands. She had brought him a tin cup of water. "You're going to boil out here," she had teased. He had grinned without looking up. "Then I'll boil on my own land." She remembered the sound of that laugh, low, easy, like he didn't know how hard the world could get. When he finally stood upright, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist, he had looked out over the north field, the same field that would one day be threatened, auctioned, defended. "You ever think about what happens after we're gone?" he had asked suddenly. She remembered frowning. "Gone where?" He nudged her shoulder gently. "Gone, gone." She didn't like that kind of talk back then. "We'll still be here," she had insisted. He had looked at her then, not teasing anymore. "Land keeps people longer than bodies do," he said quietly. "You treat it right. It remembers you." She had handed him the water. "And if someone tries to take it?" she had asked. He drank, then wiped his mouth. "Then whoever's left stands their ground." He reached for her hand. "You would, wouldn't you?" She had laughed. "I'd fight meaner than you." He had smiled. "I know you would." Then he had pressed his palm into the soil at their feet. "This land isn't just ours," he had said. "It's borrowed from the ones coming after. That's what makes it sacred." Sacred. The word had felt dramatic then. Now it felt exact. The wind shifted. Evelyn opened her eyes. The field before her glowed gold in the fading light. She could almost see him there. Broad shoulders, crooked grin, hat tipped low against the sun. Almost. Her hand slid from the fence rail and down to the soil. She bent carefully, slower than she once could, and pressed her fingers into the earth. "It's still ours," she murmured. The words were not triumphant. They were steady. She could hear his voice in memory, not loud, not ghostly, just certain. Whoever's left stands their ground. The battle had not been dramatic in the end. There had been no fireworks, no grand public apology, just filings approved, plans revised, investors redirected. Richard Caldwell's development scaled back and rerouted around protected land he could not legally disturb. He had shaken her hand once more at a county meeting weeks earlier. "You're formidable," he had said. She had answered simply, "I was married to a farmer." Now, alone in the soft darkening of evening, she allowed herself one small private smile. The creek moved quietly beyond the cottonwoods, alive, moving even when it looked still. She straightened slowly and looked toward the barn. The porch light flickered on behind her automatically. The same bulb Samuel had once replaced while standing precariously on an overturned feed bucket. She could still hear him calling out from the ladder. "If I fall, tell everyone I was heroic." "You'd fall over your own boots," she had called back. He had laughed so loud the neighbour's dog started barking. The memory tightened her throat now, not painfully, just honestly. She spoke into the field, voice low but sure. "You were right, Samuel." The wheat shifted in the breeze. They tried to buy it. They tried to measure it. They tried to rename it. Her fingers curled slightly into the soil, but they didn't understand it. The sky deepened to indigo. First stars began to pierce through. She looked up at them, the way they used to after long harvest days, lying flat in the back of the truck, dust in their hair, exhaustion in their bones. He had once pointed upward and said, "That one's ours." She had asked, "Which one?" He had answered, "Whichever one we decide to keep looking at." Now she picked one, small, steady, unwavering. "That one," she whispered. The land did not cheer. It did not swell. It simply remained. Fences still needed mending. Wheat would need cutting. Seasons would continue without apology. But the creek still flowed, the soil still held, and the red line that had once threatened to carve through memory had faded beneath new grass. Evelyn turned toward the house, her shadow stretched long behind her in the porch light. At the door, she paused once more and glanced back at the field. For a moment, just a moment, she could almost see him there again, hat-tipped, leaning against the fence, watching her with that quiet pride he never said out loud. "You stood your ground," his memory seemed to say. She nodded slightly. "So did you." Then she stepped inside, closing the screen door softly behind her. Outside, Millstone Creek moved through darkness, borrowed, protected, remembered, and the land, as it always had, kept the names of those who refused to leave it behind. I hope you liked my story. What did you think of it? I want to hear where you are listening from. Leave me a comment below.